Most people think eating less sugar starts with just willpower. They try to force themselves to stop cold turkey, to ignore the cravings, to be stronger. But let me tell you something that most people miss. Real change doesn't begin with control. It begins with awareness. You can't take control of something you haven't even noticed. And sugar, especially in the modern world, is designed to go unnoticed. It's engineered to sneak past your logic and go straight to your biology. See, your brain isn't failing you when it reaches for that cookie, or when you feel like you need a sweet drink at 3 p.m. It's doing exactly what it's been conditioned to do, because sugar has found a way to bypass conscious thought. It taps into your brain's ancient reward circuitry, specifically the dopamine system, and convinces it that this momentary pleasure is worth more than long-term clarity, energy, and health. But it doesn't stop there. Sugar doesn't just hide in the obvious places like candy and soda. It's in salad dressings, so-called healthy, granola bars, sauces, protein shakes, even breads labeled as whole grain. It wears dozens of masks: fructose, maltodextrin, cane juice, agave syrup, corn syrup solids. And if you're not aware of these aliases, you're consuming more than you think, far more. So the first real step to eating less sugar isn't fighting yourself. It's educating yourself. You have to rewire your brain to see sugar, because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. And here's something even deeper. Your brain forms habits around the cues it gets from your environment. If every time you feel stress, your response is to reach for sugar, even subtly, it becomes automatic. Unconscious, so what do? We bring it to consciousness. That means taking 3 seconds to ask, what am I really craving? Most of the time, it's not the sugar. It's calm, it's relief, it's energy. And if you can name that need, you can begin to meet it in a different, more empowering way. What I want you to understand is that awareness changes the game. When you start reading labels not with fear, but with curiosity and intention, when you start noticing how your energy shifts after different meals, when you see how sugar affects your focus, your sleep, your emotions, you're not just changing what you eat, you're changing the relationship you have with food. You're reclaiming your authority over what goes into your body. Think about how powerful that is, because sugar thrives on one thing: invisibility. It hides in plain sight and lets you believe it's harmless, that one more bite doesn't matter. But once you shine a light on it, once you start noticing its patterns, its presence, the way it makes you feel, you take the first and most important step toward freedom. This isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. When you become aware of the true role sugar is playing in your life, when you see how often it appears, how subtly it creeps in, you begin to ask better questions. Do I need this? Is this serving me? Is this choice aligned with who I want to be? And that moment, that's where transformation starts. Not in resistance, not in restriction, but in recognition. Because when you learn to see sugar for what it really is, you finally begin to choose something greater. Most people don't realize that when they crave sugar, they're not just craving taste, they're craving a chemical shift. It's happening deep in the brain, in your reward circuitry, where dopamine, the molecule of motivation and drive, is being manipulated. Sugar doesn't just give you a sweet sensation on the tongue. It gives your brain a false signal that something amazing just happened. That's the trap. That little spike of pleasure feels like a reward, but it's a trick. It doesn't last, and it leaves you needing more just to feel normal again. Dopamine is designed to help us pursue meaningful goals. It's what motivates us to get up early, train hard, stay focused, love deeply, and show up in our lives fully. But sugar hijacks that system, it floods it, and then very quickly it depletes it, which means the next time you want to feel good, the baseline is lower. You need more just to feel okay. That's why it's not just about eating less sugar. It's about reclaiming your dopamine system. Now, this doesn't mean you have to live without pleasure. That's not the goal. The goal is to create a sustainable, powerful shift in where your brain gets its rewards. You start teaching your nervous system to respond to effort, not just stimulation. You train it to find pleasure in the act of building, not just in the moment of consumption. Let's break it down. Every time you reach for sugar in a moment of boredom, fatigue, or stress, you're teaching your brain, this is how we solve discomfort. That connection gets stronger each time, but here's the good news. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire, works both ways. You can teach your brain a new path, and it starts by disrupting the pattern. The next time the craving hits, pause. Breathe and ask, what does my body really want right now? Maybe it's energy, maybe it's connection, maybe it's movement. What you're doing in that moment is interrupting the autopilot. That's not a small thing. That's the first spark of rewiring. That's how new circuits are born, through conscious repetition. Now, you can accelerate that process by shifting your reward system intentionally. For example, every time you resist the quick dopamine hit and instead choose something like a walk, hydration, deep breathing, or even just getting sunlight, you're not just making a healthier choice. You're reinforcing the neural circuits that say, we are in control. That message builds strength with each repetition. This is where discipline becomes powerful, not as punishment, but as design. Discipline isn't about denying yourself joy. It's about creating a deeper, longer-lasting source of it. When your dopamine system starts responding to progress instead of just pleasure, you feel more driven, more focused, more alive. You start waking up with purpose, not just cravings. And let's be honest, those sugar highs, they never deliver what they promise. It's a temporary hit followed by a crash, but the pursuit of strength, clarity, and growth that brings a stable kind of energy that doesn't collapse on you an hour later. That's what we're aiming for. Your brain is capable of extraordinary change. It's not fixed. It's not broken. It just needs direction, and you are the one who gives it that. Every decision, every interruption of an old habit, every time you choose presence over impulse, you're not just eating less sugar. You're becoming someone who's driven by vision, not addiction. Because when you break free from the cycle of sugar, controlled dopamine, you don't just gain health, you gain freedom. Most people think the only way to eat less sugar is to restrict, to cut everything out, to suffer through the cravings. But here's the truth, restriction alone doesn't work long term. You can't just rip something out of your life without replacing it with something better. The brain doesn't like a void. It doesn't respond well to loss. It responds to direction. If you want to move away from sugar, you have to give your body and your mind something even more satisfying, more stabilizing, and more empowering. The goal isn't to eliminate, it's to upgrade. See, sugar becomes a default when there's no alternative. When you haven't prepared something better, your brain will always fall back to what it knows. But the moment you introduce strategic replacements, nutrient-dense foods that stabilize blood sugar, protein that keeps you full, healthy fats that keep your brain sharp, you start changing biology, and that changes your behavior. Let's say your normal afternoon routine includes reaching for a candy bar or a sweetened drink when your energy crashes. You don't need to fight that head-on with willpower. What you need to do is preload your system with a better option before the crash even happens. That means getting high-quality protein in the morning, maybe pairing it with some healthy fats and slowed, digesting carbs. That stabilizes your blood sugar and makes that 3 p.m. craving weaker. Sometimes it doesn't even show up. And if it does, now you've got options. Maybe you reach for a handful of nuts, a piece of dark chocolate with fiber, or a crisp apple with almond butter. That's not punishment, that's fuel. The most powerful shift happens when you stop asking, what do I need to remove? And start asking, what can I add that serves me better? This turns the process from a fight into a strategy. It's about reconditioning your body and taste buds so they crave nourishment, not chaos. Because sugar creates chaos, it spikes, it crashes, it creates false hunger. But when you start feeding your body quality inputs, real nutrients, your system calms down. Your brain feels safe, your mood evens out, that inner noise starts to quiet. And here's the kicker: when you upgrade what you consume, your cravings start to disappear. It's not about fighting them forever. It's about making them irrelevant. You train your system to stop looking for the quick fix because it's already satisfied. You're not operating from depletion anymore. You're operating from abundance. This approach works because it's based on how your brain and body are designed to function. They don't want extremes, they want consistency. Sugar pulls you out of balance, real food brings you back in. So, when you give yourself better options, when you replace the impulse with something that supports your long-term energy, you're not just avoiding sugar. You're building a lifestyle that reinforces strength. It's not about being perfect, it's about being prepared. Because when your environment and your mindset are aligned with your goals, success isn't something you have to chase. It becomes automatic. You just live it. Because when you stop restricting and start upgrading, eating less sugar isn't a struggle. It becomes a choice rooted in power. If you're serious about eating less sugar, then you have to stop relying on willpower alone. Willpower is like a muscle. It can be strong, but it fatigues. It runs out, especially in the environments most of us live in today. We're surrounded by triggers, packaged foods, energy drinks, dessert menus, ads telling you that happiness comes in the form of a frosted bite or a syrup-filled cup. If your surroundings are constantly pushing you toward sugar, then even the strongest discipline eventually buckles. But here's the truth: you don't need to fight every moment. You need to design your environment so it works with your goals, not against them. Think about it. If your kitchen is filled with cookies, cereal bars pretending to be healthy, and sugar-loaded yogurts, what do you think you're going to reach for when you're tired, stressed, or emotionally drained? Not because you're weak, but because you're human. The brain is wired to seek the path of least resistance. The easier it is to access something sweet, the more likely it is you'll go there without even realizing it. That's why the environment matters. That's why the setup matters. You need to make your default settings support who you want to become. If you want to eat less sugar, then remove the high sugar options from your house, from your car, from your workspace. Replace them with nutrient-dense snacks, real food, and clean sources of fuel that keep you grounded. Because if it's not within reach, it's not within impulse, and this goes beyond food. Look at your routines. What time of day are you most vulnerable to cravings? What triggers them? Is it stress after a long meeting? Is it boredom at night? Is it scrolling on your phone while your energy dips? You have to identify these patterns not to shame yourself, but to strategize. If you know your energy crashes at 4 p.m., set a non-negotiable habit around it. Maybe that means stepping outside for light and movement. Maybe it's preparing a protein-rich snack in advance. Maybe it's changing your work environment so you're not exposed to sugary temptations when your defenses are low. The point is, don't wait for discipline to show up in a moment of weakness. Build systems so you don't have to rely on it. That's the difference between reactive living and intentional living. You can set up your surroundings to serve your highest standards instead of your lowest urges. That is real power. Even the people who seem like they have unbreakable discipline, they're not making heroic decisions every day. They're making fewer decisions because they've structured their environment in a way where the best choice becomes the easiest one. And that's what I want for you. I want your life to be set up so the healthiest, most empowering options are not only accessible, they're automatic. This also means being mindful of who you surround yourself with. If your social circle is always celebrating with sugar, rewarding stress with dessert, or pushing processed food at every gathering, it doesn't mean you cut everyone out. It means you lead with intention. You bring something to the table that aligns with your standards. You create influence instead of being pulled into patterns that no longer serve you. Your environment is not just a reflection of your habits, it's a tool for reshaping them. And when you set it up to reduce friction, to reduce temptation, and to reinforce the identity you're building, You stop needing constant motivation. You start living in alignment. You stop surviving your impulses and start designing your outcomes. Because when you control your environment, you control your future. If you're struggling to eat less sugar, it's not because you're lazy or lacking discipline. In many cases, it's because your biology is working against you. What most people don't realize is that when your blood sugar is unstable, your mind becomes unstable. Your energy crashes, your cravings spike, your decision-making weakens, and suddenly, reaching for sugar doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like survival. That's not about willpower, that's chemistry. The body is built to maintain balance. When your blood sugar dips too low because you skipped a meal, or you started the day with refined carbs and no protein, your brain goes into a state of urgency. It starts signaling you to get quick energy, and sugar becomes the obvious target. That's why you find yourself craving cookies, soda, chocolate, whatever gives you that fast hit. But what happens next? You get the spike, you feel better for maybe 20-30 minutes, and then you crash. Hard, now your body's panicking again. It becomes a vicious loop. Spike, crash, crave, repeat. If you want to break that cycle, you have to learn to stabilize your blood sugar. And that starts with how you begin your day. What you eat in the first few hours after waking sets the tone for your entire neurochemical state. If you start with sugar, pastries, cereal, even that flavored coffee, you're setting off a roller coaster. But if you start with protein, eggs, Greek yogurt, clean shakes, maybe paired with healthy fats like avocado or some fiber-rich vegetables, you're creating a stable, slow-release form of energy. You're building a foundation. You're signaling to your body, we're nourished, we're grounded, we're not chasing. And this stability isn't just physical, it's mental. When your blood sugar is steady, you're more emotionally regulated. You're more focused. You're more resilient. You don't fly off the handle when someone frustrates you. You don't feel overwhelmed by minor stressors. And most importantly, you have the clarity to make intentional decisions instead of reactive ones. That's when it becomes possible to choose not to eat sugar, not because you're forcing it, but because you simply don't need it. People underestimate how much their daily highs and lows are connected to this. That afternoon fog where everything feels harder. That's not just fatigue, it's likely blood sugar dropping. That late night urge to raid the fridge, it's not a lack of self-control, it's your brain looking for stability. When you start eating in a way that maintains even glucose levels throughout the day, those moments start to fade. You start operating on a completely different level. It's also about timing, spacing out your meals so you're not constantly grazing on processed snacks. Drinking water throughout the day, moving your body after you eat, even something as simple as a 10-minute walk can dramatically reduce glucose spikes. All of these are small shifts, but they have a massive compound effect, and the best part, you feel the difference fast. Within a few days of balancing your meals and avoiding the sugar spikes, your cravings begin to soften. Your mood becomes more consistent. Your mind feels clearer. That alone is enough to keep you moving forward. This isn't about perfection, it's about creating momentum. Once you feel how good stability feels, once you experience that sense of control and calm, you stop chasing the artificial high. You don't want the crash anymore, because you've learned how powerful it is to feel grounded. Because when you stabilize your blood sugar, you stabilize the real break. Through and eating less sugar doesn't come from counting grams or tracking every bite. It comes from identity. It comes from meaning. The moment you stop treating this like a diet and start seeing it as a reflection of who you are and who you're becoming, everything changes. Because when something carries emotional weight, it becomes personal. And once it's personal, it becomes powerful. Most people are trying to quit sugar from the outside in. They change the food, they change the routine, but they don't change the story they're telling themselves. And if the story in your head is still, I'm someone who loves sugar, or I can't help myself around sweets, or I always fall off track, then no matter how hard you try, your actions will eventually reflect that identity. The mind will always work to prove itself right. So the question becomes, what kind of identity are you reinforcing? What meaning are you attaching to these choices? When you link your decisions to a higher purpose, the motivation becomes deeper than appearance, deeper than numbers. Maybe it's about showing up for your kids with more energy. Maybe it's about breaking a generational pattern of addiction. Maybe it's about feeling mentally sharp and emotionally strong. When you anchor your choices in that kind of meaning, sugar stops being a temptation and starts looking like a distraction. And here's where it gets real. Every time you choose to skip that sugary snack, every time you fuel your body with intention, every time you move towards strength instead of instant gratification, you're casting a vote for your future identity. That's not small. That's how transformation works. It's not one massive leap. It's 1,000 small, repeated declarations of who you are. I am someone who chooses clarity. I am someone who honors my energy. I am someone who doesn't need sugar to feel whole. These aren't just affirmations, they're instructions. They tell your nervous system how to behave. They shape your biology. And yes, you'll still face cravings. You'll still have moments where that old voice whispers, just one won't hurt. But in those moments, you get to pause and ask, is this aligned with the person I'm becoming? Because that's what we're after: alignment. Not perfection, not restriction, but consistency between your values and your behavior. When your choices match your identity, it's not effort anymore, it's embodiment. This is also where long-term momentum is built. Anyone can eat clean for a few days out of pressure or shame or a quick burst of motivation. But sustainable change comes from pride, from knowing that you're living in integrity, from looking in the mirror and saying, this is me, this is what I stand for now. That level of clarity turns every decision into an opportunity to reinforce your power. The beautiful part is, the more you live from that space, the less you need external motivation. It's no longer about willpower, it's about alignment with purpose, and when you fall off, you don't spiral. You reset because you're not chasing an outcome anymore, you're walking in identity, so don't just aim to eat less sugar, aim to become the person who doesn't depend on it. Aim to live like someone who values strength, energy, presence, and freedom, because when your identity leads, your behavior follows.